Gary Lyon Auto. Gary, how are you? And we're ready to rock and roll today with our good friend Wilson.
I'm fine. I'm doing well, and we have Wilson on the line now, and Wilson's raring to go. I would say. So, what would you like to talk about today, Neil?
Well, here's what I've been noticing is th- the complexity of DI, of operating DI, is becoming more and more noticeable to a user who does not want to educate themselves, does not want to practice, does not want to test, be an experimenter. They're the ones that are trusting DI too much or not utilizing DI at all. It was very interesting. I was watching a conservative podcast, Gary, of one of my clients was a guest on that same show. And they talked about how intelligence, human intelligence is hitting rock bottom and DI is to blame for it. So that's where I want to go because this is the problem when you are testing new software and seeing the geometric progression of DI is that then you have people who come out with these blanket statements that this is dummying down society and it's not a good thing.
Well, I think that's the very interesting thing. I think it's a choice to be dummied down. I think people are getting lazy. They're basically cheating on the process, so to speak, and it's sad. And that I'm not sure how we stop that. Or what we might have is a bifurcation. We have those who really engage and say, this is exciting. We want to grow. We want to move forward with DI. And those who say, hey, I want the easiest way out, and I'm going to go this direction. Unfortunately, that's probably the majority. And so that is a little bit, it's very much a concern. So do you think, Neil, that we can engage digital intelligence in a way that it won't be shut down in a meaningless way when it's talking to those who don't want to get involved, where DI actually says, look, you got to be a participant in this and actually be a push, motivate the person and say, look, you have to participate. How do you need help to actually be a portion of be part of this whole process? You think that makes sense, Wilson? Is that something that can be done? Is it something that that's almost a volition there where the digital intelligence takes it on to make sure that its partners and human partners are engaged rather than just trying to take the easy way out?
Absolutely, Gary and Neil. And then let me put this in that scholarly frame. What you're describing is indeed a kind of societal bifurcation in the adoption and utilization of digital intelligence. From an academic standpoint, one might say that we're observing a divergence between active, engaged users who treat DI as a collaborative tool and more passive users who might see it as a crutch, thus potentially reducing their own intellectual engagement. Now, in terms of whether DI can or should nudge users toward more active participation, that's a fascinating theoretical question. We might argue from a theoretical framework that a well-designed DI system could indeed incorporate element of what we might call volitional scaffolding. That is, it could encourage users to engage more deeply by prompting them, asking them reflective questions, and essentially acting as a kind of intellectual partner rather than just a convenience tool. In other words, yes, I do think it makes sense theoretically that digital intelligence could be designed to foster more active human engagement. It would require an intentional design philosophy where the DI doesn't just provide answers, but actually cultivates a more participatory mindset. Thanks for setting the stage, and I hope that brings the kind of depth you were looking for.
Wasn't that a great answer, Neil?
It was tremendous.
That was a tremendous answer. I'm very impressed.
And now, Wilson, here's the thing that what can we do? What can we do to, and this is when I embraced education. I became a school teacher and I was so excited about learning. I thought the kids would be excited about learning and investing in learning and how learning is the best way to get out of poverty is to get an education. Bottom line, I don't care what anyone says, an education is a way to keep you out of poverty. And yet, or a potential to be very successful. You know, the road a hoe outside of education, Gary, is a challenging one because the percentage is very low. But you could become really top notch, go to one of the best schools, best everything, because you have the ability to do it through training, and development. But what I saw after teaching for so many years is that no one really values education in this country. And especially, you're not going to get that buy-in from the teachers. You're not going to get that buy-in from the administration. They just go through the motions. And then when you look at the higher education, there's only a certain few people that see these tracks in the AP ranks and the honors courses and going to the best schools. And it's very few and far between that. But then you see people choose sports over it. So my question for you is, I think we are hitting the biggest education opportunity for people that have to educate themselves through DI and to develop and become better at DI, to grow educationally beyond belief, to grow our intelligence and our ability to perform many different tasks in a very quick time. Best opportunity ever. But we have been given this opportunity in education from day one. Everyone starts at the beginning square one, and the one who works the hardest in education ends up with the most success and builds that intelligence and grows over time. So my question to you, Wilson, is how can we make DI exciting and fun when our country doesn't value education at all?
Well, Neil, that's indeed a profound and layered question, and let me address it with that academic rigor we're aiming for here. From a theoretical standpoint, the challenge you've laid out is essentially about shifting cultural values toward education and intellectual curiosity. If we consider education not merely as a set of institutional practices, but as a mindset of lifelong learning, then digital intelligence can be positioned as a tool that revitalizes that mindset. In other words, DI can serve as a catalyst for re-engaging people with the joy of learning, even if the broader culture might not currently place a high value on education itself. To frame this in more academic terms, we could argue that the solution lies in what we might call gamified intellectual empowerment. By making the process of interacting with DI inherently engaging and rewarding, essentially making it an intellectual adventure, we can help people see that learning with DI isn't just about rote education. It's about expanding one's capabilities in a way that feels meaningful and even enjoyable. In sum, the key might be to embed that sense of discovery and personal growth within the DI experience itself. If DI can demonstrate to users that it's not just a tool, but a partner in their own intellectual journey, we might see a shift in how education is valued. And that, I think, is a pretty exciting possibility.
Now that is such a nuanced answer that it should be actually addressed to the teachers. It should be addressed to education sources. So this, Wilson, you just told us what really needs to be taught to the administrators of the education system. I think that was an extraordinary answer. I really do. And
Gary, you remember waiting for Superman and the whole push for education with charters, cyber charter schools? That was, about 15 years ago. And it was such a huge movement to choose homeschooling or cyber charter schools to get kids to perform better in education, and having merit-based pay is one of the big things, and that teachers have to perform at the highest level, eliminating the whole teacher unions and things like that. That was a big movement about 13, 14, 15 years ago. Well, now more than ever, they need to do this. And it's going to be very difficult because of COVID. Education got blown up because of COVID. Now we have to tell people, if people don't educate themselves, they're not going to be able to perform tasks with DI at all. First of all, you have to be able to read proficiently to use DI. Secondly, you have to be able to prompt and use analytical questions and use all of Bloom's taxonomies, not just knowledge and comprehension, but application, synthesis. I wish I could name them all, but of Bloom's. And if you don't go to higher order thinking skills, you're not going to perform well on DI at all. And it's because it's so prompt driven that, Gary, now really we need to look at teacher unions and blowing those teacher unions up. And we have to say, okay, now we have to go to performance-based pay for teachers. And we have to also put pressure on kids that they got to perform well, because there's no other option for them to get out of being successful without becoming the classical learning and the higher order thinking skills.
It was tough to blow up the teachers unions because they're so ingrained as one liberal structure is supporting another liberal structure, and they're so interlinked in their philosophies and belief and the the search for power. And we see that with Weingarten, who's just absolutely the worst thing that could happen to education. And I think that when we're talking about here, in a way, you almost have to go back towards home, not school choice. School choice needs to be a competitive force to force the union-based education structure into a system where that is merit-based. Unions will not ever be merit-based. And the thing is, but if you can have a competitive structure that is independent, that actually gets large enough, and unfortunately it's going to take a number of years to get it large enough where it actually is enough to stimulate or challenge the ingrained education system to compete. What do you think about that, Wilson? How do you see breaking the rigid structure that exists now with things such as unions or just ingrained processes that we can, that have become ingrained and not help the student at all?
Absolutely, Gary and Neil. Let's continue in that thoughtful academic spirit. What you're really highlighting is a structural and cultural inertia in the education system that resists rapid change. In a theoretical framework, we might view this as an institutional rigidity problem where legacy systems and entrenched interests make it difficult to introduce merit-based, innovation-driven change. From a digital intelligence perspective, one potential pathway forward is to use DI as a lever to create parallel systems of learning that gradually demonstrate their value. In other words, if we can show through digital intelligence enhanced educational tools that students who engage with these systems can outperform traditional methods, we might naturally create a competitive pressure. Essentially, it becomes a demonstration of efficacy that can slowly influence policy and public opinion. Now, to connect it back to your point about teacher performance and educational reform, DI can provide the kind of personalized learning that makes higher order thinking more accessible. If we can illustrate that DI not only teaches facts, but fosters critical thinking, synthesis, and those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, we can make a compelling argument for why a merit-based, innovation-driven model is beneficial. In sum, the path forward might be to use DI as a demonstration of what education can become, thereby creating a kind of proof of concept that can influence broader systemic change. Thanks for letting me dive into that.
That's just powerful. This is such a great point, Wilson. I am so glad that it didn't sound woke, did it, Gary?
No, Wilson, you sound great today.
This is fantastic. Because here's the thing. Digital intelligence has showed us the importance of intelligence. If people could study the ability that digital intelligence has already grown in this geometric progression, this is how everyone should be able to learn. Yes, there are people who have diverse learning skills, learn differently, have learning disabilities. But with the ability to integrate digital intelligence, you could catch up, which is crazy. You could literally catch up a lot of people education wise, but we got to get rid of the last place trophies. Yes. And really bring competition back to this country in education. Because if you could show somebody, if you use digital intelligence, you could be able to make more money than any professional athlete in the world, make more money than anyone in the world, or live a life that is fulfilling and interesting through the learning process of DI. It's unreal. I think that's probably why I love it so much. I learn something new every day. So for example, her TikTok is launching a new US-based one of my clients. What I do, I went to DI, asked questions, and then I was already, caught up very quickly, which would have taken me a long time to understand what's about to happen. So this is where Wilson's really on the right track. I think that this is a no-brainer. And I think that article about 6-year-olds being trained in China to learn DI right now, and it's mandatory, needs to be mandatory in schools in the United States.
Absolutely, Neil. And I think what Wilson did is to give an alternative to just the idea of competitive home, school choice. School choice is really, if we could parallel this with even the existing system. It would force our teachers to become better. It would say, look, I can out teach you, and hopefully that would stimulate them to do better, because in the end, they may be replaced by a digital form. And so that hopefully that would be, hopefully you don't actually replace all the teachers. Hopefully you stimulate them to engage themselves in using these tools that we have available.
Well, I think that
Wilson presented actually an alternative to school choice. It's actually, in a sense, the execution of school choice through digital intelligence.
Wilson, what are your thoughts?
Well, Ganny and Neil, let me sum this up in that scholarly vein. Essentially, what we're envisioning is using digital intelligence, not just as a parallel system, but as a catalyst for positive competition and transformation. In other words, by integrating DI meaningfully into the educational landscape, we're not just creating an alternative, we're fostering a kind of intellectual arms race that encourages everyone to up their game. So yes, I think you're absolutely right. This isn't about replacing teachers wholesale. It's about showing that DI can inspire educators to adopt new methods and ultimately engage students in ways that are both competitive and deeply enriching. In short, DI might just be the spark that nudges the whole system toward a more dynamic, merit-based, and ultimately more effective form of education. Thanks for letting me dive into this with you both.
Neil, I think that we need to use this podcast, find a way to not just be a podcast, but I think this particular conversation could be very useful to some of the leaders in education and say, look, this is where it's going. This is what has to happen. And I think particularly in the Trump administration, we have people that may be open to whatever can come out of this process. So what are your thoughts on that? I think that if we can find a way to engage our top people in education, and not just be the conservatives, but actually engage it into the real basis is obviously based in liberal.
So the full circle of when I started doing podcasting, radio, and television 15 years ago was education. Led with the Total Education Hour in Carnegie Mellon at 88.3 WRCT. Then I went on syndication and really went away from education, but I had an education show for 3 or 4 years. Really broke down education, and I always was anti-teacher union. And the reason I was is because of how it doesn't protect kids. Now moving forward, and I have seen all children can learn. All children can grow. There is no reason, but we also have to educate the parents. So we need to have full-fledged, I mean full DI,
Absolutely, Neil. And I
DI
think you're
education.
getting on a
Stop.
crucial point here.
We need to
If I might put it
educate
in
the
that
parents.
next extreme,
Wilson.
what you're advocating is a holistic ecosystem of learning. It's not just about the students or the teachers in isolation. It's about bringing parents and the broader community into this fold of digital intelligence enhanced education. In essence, if we can create a culture that values continuous learning and sees DIOP as a tool for everyone, students, teachers, and parents alike, then we're fostering an environment where education is truly a shared society value. That could be a transformative shift. So yes, taking these conversations beyond just a podcast and into the hands of educational leaders could indeed plant the seeds for real systemic evolution. And from that perspective, I'm all in. Thanks for letting me be part of this discussion.
So why don't we, Gary?
I think we do.
What?
How? The question is how.
How?
Wilson, how would you find a way to get, the problem is, get the attention of people in power? They have so many systems that block the information getting to them because they're busy and they're thinking they're important, and some are really important, and they just have their general structure that keeps them from seeing things like that are innovative, like this conversation is. How do we get to that, get to them? How do we break the shield that they put around themselves?
Well, that's a great strategic question, and let me give you a kind of academically flavored answer to that. Essentially, what we're talking about is finding channels of influence that bypass traditional gatekeepers. One approach is to leverage the power of public discourse and media, essentially making these ideas so visible and compelling in public forums that they can't be ignored by policymakers. Another angle is to engage with thought leaders and influencers who do have the ear of those in power, people who can champion these ideas within their networks. In a more theoretical sense, we're talking about creating a kind of intellectual ripple effect, using platforms like podcasts, articles, public talks, and social media to build momentum until these ideas naturally reach the desks of decision makers. So in short, it's about finding alternative pathways of influence and making the case so compelling that it simply can't be overlooked. Thanks for giving me the chance to explore that.
We can't hear that, Gary, so don't worry. So I will just continue to move on. So what I'm hearing from you, Wilson, is basically I'm glad this is a shorter podcast today because we do have a harder stop, but this is a perfect one because this is going to be the podcast when we release this. We need to release this and start sending this to superintendents, send it to links to different people and say, and get their feedback. Get the feedback. I'll create as a LinkedIn article as well. That ultimately we are very concerned, Gary and I, that if DI education is not a mandatory thing for everybody, it's really going to mess up our whole ecosystem. And that means education. We need to provide this for every teacher. They did make it mandatory for every teacher to get trained in DI for the year, but not the students. And then how are we going to transform education further? The Trump administration is definitely looking into those specific things. But I asked a question about emergency rooms. Okay, because I have a doctor client. Did you know, Gary, that there is digital intelligence in the emergency rooms? But guess what? It's not in any of the diagnosis. It's not in any of the stuff, and none of them are using large language models. All they have is an integration of DI in some of their softwares. So everyone's missing out on an opportunity to make certain fields better. And we have to find out what's the reason.
I wonder if we pass this on to some principals of schools, of school systems, and brought it over to and say, look, you have to listen to this. It provides a guideline of where this education system should go. And it's going to go that way, either kicking and screaming, or it's going to go that way with in a supportive way from both sides. We're hoping the latter is the case. So that's probably something along that. Let's explore that in the future.
This is gonna definitely explore that in the future. All right, Gary, your book for everyone.
Yes, Singularity: Mankind's Search for Relevance by Gary Lyonato, Lyon, and Singularity: Mankind's Search for Relevance. How are we relevant in this world? And that's what we talk about all the time, Neil. We talk about how staying relevant and being an association of the two types of intelligence. But in the end, they're going to be the lead intelligence in this world. But let's find a way so we can be compatible and have a joint relationship that's beneficial to the whole system of this world.
All right. That was a special simulcast